Hello and welcome to our live coverage of the Scottish Labour Democrats Spring Conference in Dundee. Despite some protests in the city, the party is positive on the second day of the gathering, and delegates are preparing to hear their leader Willie Rennie give his keynote speech in around 40 minutes' time. I'm joined here in the studio by Professor John Curtis of Strathclyde University, and our political editor Brian Taylor is at the West Park Conference Centre in his hometown of Dundee. Good afternoon, gentlemen. First of all, to you, Brian.
Good afternoon indeed.
How are delegates feeling this time around? Are they buoyed up after that win in Eastleigh?
Yeah, I think Eastleigh has helped, and they've had a couple of reasonably good, in fact, they would say very good, local by-election results in Scotland. I mean, these are straws in the wind, and Eastleigh doesn't necessarily translate, of course, directly into Scotland, because UKIP perhaps helped very substantially by depressing the Conservative vote. I think the conference here is operating on two dimensions, two levels. You have UK ministers, Nick Clegg, Danny Alexander, Vince Cable, talking about the problems of coping with the austerity programme and economic problems, and then you have almost in tandem with that, the Scottish Party, Leader Willie Rennie, talking about coping with the very fact of coalition, because, of course, it hasn't necessarily been all that popular in Scotland because they were coalescing with the Conservatives, whose vote is not all that high in Scotland. And so you have that. It's not a mismatch. It's politics operating in two dimensions simultaneously, but the two are having to come together, in that you had Nick Clegg explaining to the conference yesterday, okay, he says he gets it, he gets the concept, that it wasn't all that wonderful for the party in Scotland. They were reduced to 5 MSPs at the Holyrood elections, and Willie Rennie attributes that almost entirely to going into coalition with the Conservatives.
John Curtis, interesting to hear Brian talking about these two strands. The party is obviously facing quite a difficult time at the moment, but let's pick up on Eastleigh. Brian said it is maybe buoying up the mood there. Are they right to be buoyed up by that?
Well, I mean, certainly winning Eastleigh was better than losing it, but I think in truth it's all too easy to exaggerate the good news that Eastleigh brings to the party. The truth is, the share of the vote the party got, 33%, the lowest share of the vote ever in a by-election to be sufficient to win. It was actually the third biggest drop in Liberal Democrat support in any post-war by-election, down 14.5 points. In fact, pretty much in line with the message of the opinion polls. And if you look at the opinion polls north of the border, I mean, Willie Rennie's been trying to talk up a couple of local government by-elections. But in truth, if you look at the opinion polls, they do not give the Liberal Democrats much good cheer at all. In terms of their share of the vote across Scotland as a whole, both for Holyrood elections and for Westminster elections, we're looking at polls that be in the round of the 5 to 7% range, as bad as it was in Holyrood. Pretty much as big a drop as the UK opinion polls are suggesting. And we've also had some very specific polling funded by Lord Ashcroft, the former Conservative chairman, looking specifically at what's going on in those seats, the 11 seats the Liberal Democrats currently hold in Scotland. Answer, according to this poll, even on the more favourable of the two measures that he has in his poll in terms of the level of Liberal Democrat support. Liberal Democrat support down around 20 points, and all but 2 of the 11 seats would on those figures be lost. So I think the truth is, the party still has an awful lot of work to do before it could be in a position where it could be confident of holding the majority of its seats in Scotland, indeed in truth the majority of its seats across the UK as a whole.
Brian, it was interesting to watch your web chat with Willie Rennie yesterday. He comes across as quite pragmatic, even maybe quite optimistic. He's going to speak in about 35 minutes' time. What do you think he'll be telling the delegates?
Well, I think he does. With regard to strategy, when you've got a result as bad as that, down to 5 MSPs and, not even within sight of government. Remember, at the previous election in 2007, there had been the prospect of forming a coalition. There were talks with the SNP. They foundered entirely on the issue of, guess what, a referendum. But the Liberal Democrats went back from that in 2011. When you got 5 seats, I mean, you must feel like going into a cupboard and crying. But Willie Rennie's taken exactly the counter position, which is to come out fighting, punching above the weight, going really hard on every issue, tackling Alex Salmond, issuing a flurry of pronouncements on this, that and the other. I think what we'll get from him in the speech will be strategy with regard to devolution. He will argue that the Liberal Democrats are riding ahead of the others on the concept of more powers within devolution, not of course independence, but more powers. He will invite his other fellow unionist parties, although he disavows the word union. He says he's featherless. Invite the other powers, Labour and the Tories, to move in that same direction, and even say at the SNP, in the event of a no vote in the referendum, that the SNP might join in that search for more devolved powers.
Gentlemen, plenty more from you both later. Thank you very much for just now. Now, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander, had the conference floor this morning and said the government was cracking down on people who evaded or avoided tax. He also outlined what was needed from the delegates between now and the autumn of 2014.
Our job, from now until the day of the referendum, will be to demonstrate why better together isn't just a slogan, but the truth. It will be a fight. But it is a fight that for the sake of our country, our children and our grandchildren, we cannot, must not and will not lose. The road to recovery will be long and hard, but we are up to the challenge. The deficit cut by a quarter in 2 years, 250,000 new businesses created, more people in work today than ever in our country's history, over 1 million new jobs created. We are taking the long-term decisions too, to boost key parts of the Scottish economy. Now, a few months ago at Inverness Airport, a man told me that he was now being paid through an intermediary rather than direct by his British employer so that it could avoid paying its fair share of employers' national insurance. I went back to the Treasury to investigate, and it turns out that he's not alone. Under Labour's tax rules, over 100,000 workers are being employed through these offshore payroll agents. HMRC had already started investigating. And by running their payroll through an offshore location like Jersey, these shadowy intermediaries can avoid paying employment tax at a cost to the Exchequer of around £100 million a year and rising, completely counter to the spirit of the law, neither right nor fair. So I can announce today that in the budget we will introduce new powers to clamp down on companies who avoid tax by putting their payroll in tax havens. Our message is clear. British firms employing British workers in Britain must pay British taxes.
Now, steady under fire and start winning again were the key messages in yesterday's speech from the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. The delegates were also told MPs had put Scotland at the heart of the coalition government's agenda and were aware of the impact of the coalition deal with the Tories.
The legacy of Margaret Thatcher's government lingers long in the memory here. People in Scotland know that the Conservatives can't be trusted to deliver a fairer society, not on their own anyway. With only one MP in Scotland who honestly thinks that the Conservatives on their own will stand up for you. Just last weekend, Theresa May gave a speech arguing that Britain could pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights, that we could abandon the rights of British citizens just to satisfy the right of the Conservative Party. She wants this option to remain, as she said, on the table. No chance. As I said last weekend, it won't be on the cabinet table as long as I'm sitting around it. That's why having Liberal Democrats in government, anchoring it in the centre ground and delivering for Scotland is so important. Building a stronger economy, in a fairer society, enabling everyone to get on in life. But people in Scotland also know that Labour can't be trusted to build a strong economy. That you can't trust Labour with your money. That's why they have stagnated in Scotland, and we saw the evidence in Eastleigh too. Labour made no progress there whatsoever. When the people of Eastleigh had the opportunity, they rejected them once again. They remember that Labour destroyed the economy, spent all the money and left us with nothing. And now they oppose every single saving the coalition has been forced to make, with not a single suggestion for how to raise money instead. Labour's plan for government is like a ready meal lasagna. No one really knows what's in it. Except of course, they did have one idea, and that's the mansion tax, which of course was ours first. And then there's the SNP, who haven't been forthcoming in telling the public the true consequences of independence. In public, they say the economy will be strong and society will be fairer. In private, They know the oil won't last forever, and they don't know how they'll pay for public services, for defence, and for pensions. You deserve better than that. Only the Liberal Democrats can deliver a stronger economy in a fairer society, enabling everyone to get on in life. That's why we believe Scotland and the United Kingdom are better together. Only a vibrant Scotland, as part of a prosperous United Kingdom, can bring the stronger economy Scotland needs. But independence, it's not just a numbers game. The people of the United Kingdom have a rich shared heritage. We share a culture, a history, an identity. We share values, experiences, Scottish, English, Welsh, Northern Irish. Our lives and our fortunes are entwined in towns and cities across the British Isles. We live, work and play together, side by side. As I said to you last year in Inverness, I believe the bonds that bring us together are stronger than the forces that would tear us apart. Together, we can build a stronger economy in a fairer society, enabling everyone to get on in life. Get used to those words. Get used to saying them. That's the message I need you to deliver across the country. I need you to explain it to people each and every day, from now, for the next 2 years and beyond. Tell them that only the Liberal Democrats have the values and ideas to build a better future. Tell them that only we can deliver the stronger economy and fairer society that Scotland and all of Great Britain needs. The unspoken story of the last year has been that Liberal Democrats are winning again. In council by-elections, we've been making gain after gain after gain. Last year, contrary to the impression you'd get from the media, since the council elections last May, across the United Kingdom, we actually made an overall gain at council by-elections. And then came Eastleigh. It wasn't a campaign we wanted to have to fight. The circumstances that caused it were not ones any of us would have ever wished for. But we dusted ourselves off and we said, bring it on. Our opponents threw everything they had at us. Controversy dominated the headlines, and yet, despite all that, we won. Now no one can be in any doubt. The Liberal Democrats are winning again. You can feel that sense of renewed optimism and purpose in Scotland too, thanks in no small part to the excellent leadership of Willie Rennie. And there are signs. And there are signs of that fight back in recent by-elections too, as the results of 2 recent by-elections have shown. In Eastleigh, we didn't shy away from being in government. We embraced it, and we campaigned on it with confidence. Every leaflet had a local message and a national message. We won not in spite of being in power, we won because we are in power, locally and nationally. As I said in Brighton last weekend, I've spent nearly 3 years asking you to hold firm. 3 years urging you to remain steady under fire. And you have. But now, Scottish Liberal Democrats, I have a different message for you. Win. Get back out there. Tell our side of the story. And we will win again, on the doorstep, in town halls, in Holyrood and in Westminster. The Liberal Democrats are winning again, and we will win again in Scotland too. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Right, let's pick up on some of the themes in that speech with Brian Taylor and John Curtis once again. Brian, the Lib Dems are locked in this dance with the Tories, and the coalition has seen a pretty difficult times over Leveson just in the past few days. But of course, Mr Clegg's always making that point that they're the brake on the Tories, isn't he?
I think Leveson helps as a narrative, because it helps them to stress that they can set out distinctive points and positions from the Conservatives where required, they can, for example, argue that they are taking a distinctive position on the economy. They can argue they are tempering what would otherwise be done by the Conservatives. And they can also say that there are particular issues that the Conservatives would do on their own that they would veto. One example Nick Clegg used was the idea of abandoning the Convention on Human Rights and saying that it wouldn't be on the Cabinet table as long as he was in that Cabinet. Now, in terms of the reaction from the Scottish delegates, they like that sort of thing. It was a kind of understated evangelism. Perhaps Nick Clegg felt this wasn't the time for particularly a bombastic speech, because that would then be coming at a period of difficulty economically. But at the same time, they are trying to set out the argument that they can offer a distinctive position in government.
And the Scottish Tories hit back hard yesterday after that speech, didn't they?
They did. I was quite surprised at that, to some extent, in that they generally tend to let these conference things go unless they're making a particular point about a particular individual. But they felt the necessity, obviously, to make that point. And of course, they're responding to what was a deliberate attack, although I felt more mild, perhaps, than the Conservatives interpreted it, but a deliberate attack by Nick Clegg. Why is he doing that? Well, one, across the UK as a whole, setting out a distinctive Liberal Democrat position. Two, in Scotland, reflecting that point that he mentioned, that he knows that the coalition with the Conservatives was and remains deeply unpopular.
John Curtis, there was some battlefield terminology being employed there. The delegates have been steady under fire, but now he was urging them to go over the top now and to win. And he was mentioning just some of their electoral success. I saw you give a little grimace at one point, though.
Well, it is true that there are a couple of by-elections that have been held since last May 2012, which of course was a disastrous result for the Scottish Liberal Democrats to go in the local elections, where their share of the vote went up. Now, one I think is genuinely a really good result. In Rutherglen, their share of the vote's up around 5 points as compared with 2012. And in fact, it's an even better result in that ward than it was 5 years ago. But the truth is, Rutherglen's actually a place where the Democrats have a rather remarkable local strength, and they've obviously managed to hang on to it there. There's another one, however, up at Kirkintilloch, where the truth is actually the vacancy arose because an independent who'd come top of the poll had died. All of the parties' share of the votes actually went up, and the Liberal Democrats admittedly went up most. But I think, therefore, as a result, that's not necessarily the best guide. And a couple of other by-elections would have been held where, in fact, the Liberal Democrat vote was either down, or in one case, they only managed to get about 1% share of the vote out at Coatbridge. So even there, it's something of a mixed message. But I think the truth is, at the end of the day, we have to look at the opinion polls to get the most reliable evidence. And the truth is that Nick Clegg is trying to say to his party, things have turned. But if you look at the UK-wide opinion polls, the party is still stuck at around 10 or 11%. And that has been where it has been stuck ever since November 2011, i.e. 2010, i.e. the moment in which they announced the £9,000 tuition fees for England and Wales. And the biggest criticism that the public have, including those who voted for the Democrats back in 2010 of the party, is that they don't stick to their principles. And one can still see how this saying one thing but doing another on something on which they'd really gone out on a limb on is still gnawing away at people's willingness to reinvest their confidence in the party.
And Brian, on the issue of independence, there was almost a strange moment there where the delegates were laughing almost when Mr Clegg was repeating his mantra, better and stronger together in the UK. Is he almost a semi-detached figure when he comes here to speak about the independence debate?
No, I don't think semi-detached. I don't think that at all. I think he feels passionately about the cause of the union, or federalism as they would have it. What I think he was doing there is stressing that this is a fight to be had, a battle to be won in Scotland, and he was urging his delegates to set aside any qualms they had about the current economic situation and the current politics and win this fight. Because one of the strategies Alex Salmond is deploying by having the referendum late in 2014 is hoping that by then, with a UK general election just over the horizon, his opponents are fighting each other rather than fighting him. I think that's unlikely to happen. I think they'll manage to coalesce around what is an enormously huge issue. I think what you hear from some of the delegates here, though, is, they hear Nick Clegg saying, stop apologising, get out there and win. They'd like a little more ammunition from Mr Clegg. They would like the economy, frankly, to be doing better under the tenure of the present government. They would like, frankly, fewer of the problems, the self-inflicted problems, Lord Renard, Chris Huhne, etc., that there have been in recent weeks and months. And so that's the reason, perhaps, that there is a slightly muted response between the two. I don't think they were criticising Nick Clegg in that particular format.
Brian, thanks for the moment. Final question to John Curtis on this issue. Nick Clegg himself, is he a a popular figure in the Scottish Party. I mean, they've really suffered under the coalition, haven't they?
The truth is, Nick Clegg is not a popular figure, period. He is the most unpopular of the Westminster leaders. He's been persistently unpopular for a long time. And we have been in a very, very different world from that Clegg mania of the 2000 election campaign for an awful long time. And I think the truth is, it's very, very difficult to see how a politician who's been that persistently unpopular for that length of time is going to manage to turn things around. And I think, in truth, they won in Eastleigh, certainly not because of Nick Clegg, but frankly, despite him, which is probably why, in the end, some of those arguments about what Nick Clegg did or didn't know about Chris Rennard and whether he'd been fully upfront or not probably didn't make much difference, because the truth is the public have long since lost their confidence in Nick Clegg, and to be told that maybe he didn't handle this issue terribly well wasn't telling them anything that they think they necessarily regarded as particularly new.
John, thanks very much. Now, just 3 years ago, the thought of UK Lib Dem government ministers at a Scottish conference would have been unthinkable. We heard from Danny Alexander earlier. We can now speak to Jo Swinson, the MP for East Dunbartonshire, who serves in the coalition government as Consumer Affairs Minister. Good afternoon, Jo Swinson. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good afternoon.
We've been talking about some
Lovely
of the...
to be with you.
Good to see you. We've been talking about some of the pain of coalition you've been feeling. Nick Clegg, a fairly unpopular feeling. What do you think your personal achievements have been in office? Has the pain of the coalition been worth it for you?
Well, just last week I was able to announce a really strong package of action to clamp down on rogue payday lenders who have been ripping off consumers. I've also been taking through in Parliament in the last few weeks, and continuing to do so, the new bill to bring in shared parental leave to let mums and dads choose how they share time off after a baby is born. And that's just two examples of the differences that Liberal Democrats are making in government to help create a stronger economy and a fairer society. And I'm delighted to be able to do that. I'm not going to hide that the economy at the moment is very challenging. We've seen the biggest downturn in the economy with the 2008 crash, for many, many decades, and obviously people are all feeling the impact of that. But that's why it's really important that we're able to have Liberal Democrats in that government delivering help for people in these tough times, such as the £600 tax cut for people in low and middle incomes that's coming in next month.
Now, in some ways you can have this, it's a 5-year parliamentary term, it's supposed to be until 2015. Do you feel that you can almost achieve more in these 5 years in one short burst than you could have done as a long-serving opposition politician?
Well, I've had the experience of 5 years as an opposition MP, and the chances to try and change the government's mind on anything were very few and far between. It was incredibly difficult to do because the government had already made up its mind when it came to put a proposal in the public domain. Now, being part of that government, we're able to change the proposals as they're actually being worked through, and indeed make sure that Liberal Democrat proposals get right in there. It's not a Liberal Democrat government. We don't get everything our own way. That's because we've got 57 MPs out of 650. But we're punching well above our weight in Westminster and indeed in Holyrood, where Willie Rennie, through leading his team of MSPs, has made the SNP think twice on some of their college cuts, for example, and he's really taking the fight to them to try and make sure we can get help for more 2-year-olds in early years education being provided, like we're doing in England through the coalition government, but which the SNP has so far, unfortunately, failed to follow.
Right, well, I mean, the Lib Dems have proved fairly unpopular. I mean, you just got 5 Lib Dem MSPs at the 2011 Holyrood election. Do you think the people of East Dunbartonshire will want you back in 2015?
Well, I very much hope so. It's obviously up to them. I think it was interesting hearing John Curtis talk about the by-elections earlier, because one of those in Kirkintilloch was partly in my constituency, and we saw a 10-fold increase in the Liberal Democrat vote. That wasn't just because there was no independent candidate, that was because we had a great local candidate, Susan Murray, with a track record of action for her local community, and that's the proposition I'll be putting to the voters in 2015, when I very much hope they'll re-elect me as the MP for East Dunbartonshire to keep serving my community.
And how do you rate your colleagues' chances? According to the Lord Ashcroft poll, it suggests that there'll just be 2 Scottish Lib Dem seats, Ross Skye in Lochaber and Orkney in Shetland.
Well, look, people have, in polls and surveys, have predicted the demise of the Liberal Democrats for many, many years. At the end of the day, the votes that count are the votes in the ballot box. That's up to the people in each local community to decide who is the best person to represent them when the election comes. But as I say, I think the local by-election results we've seen in Scotland, and indeed the result that we had, the stunning result we had in Eastleigh, show that where people have a strong local Liberal Democrat team, then they are still prepared to vote Liberal Democrat. And we will also be able to, of course, champion the achievements we have in government in cutting the tax bills for people on low and middle earnings, on making sure that we have a Green Investment Bank headquartered in Edinburgh to help tackle climate change and make the investment to have a stronger economy. And some of the measures I was talking about earlier.
Now, you've been at the centre of a media storm because of the Lord Renard affair, of course, claims of inappropriate behaviour from the former chief executive of the party, which, of course, he denies. What do you think the party could do in the future to make sure such allegations are handled in the appropriate ways? Nick Clegg admitted himself the party had not acted swiftly or decisively enough because of after concerns were first raised about Renard's behaviour.
Well, my focus throughout this has been the women that confided in me and who we want to protect from any such kind of inappropriate behaviour in the future as well. That's why it's really important that the party has these 2 inquiries set up, and particularly the independent inquiry led by Helena Morrissey, which is asking people to put forward any thoughts and experiences that they have, and that will come forward with, I'm sure, a range of recommendations about how we can handle such situations better should they arise in future, and actually to look more widely at the culture of politics too, because this isn't just an issue that's affected the Liberal Democrats. These issues around inappropriate behaviour and casual sexism are much wider in our society. Yes, we absolutely need to tackle that in the Lib Dems and in politics more widely, but also as Minister for Women, I'm absolutely determined that we tackle that in society too.
But of course you reported the allegations to the party hierarchy. Were you worried that there was a cover-up? There appears to be a cover-up after you reported the allegations?
Well, I don't think that's true. I set out in some detail my role in the affair at the party conference last weekend, and that was a 7-minute speech, most of which is on the BBC website, if anyone's keen to look at the full details of that. But I don't think that's an accurate description of what happened, but nonetheless, I'm sure lessons can be learned. These are difficult situations. We need to be able to make sure we've got proper processes in place, which were lacking at the time, and that's why the inquiries will be able to deliver that.
Jo Swinson, MP, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, it's a busy week for the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, with the budget looming large on the horizon this week, as well as his party's conference in Dundee. Nevertheless, our political editor, Brian Taylor, managed to secure an interview with Danny Alexander earlier today.
Well, what we've discovered is that there is a problem where some companies are routing their payroll through offshore locations. They're doing that in order to avoid paying employers' national insurance. That's costing the country at least £100 million a year, and this is rising. So we're going to take action in the budget to deal with this. There's another cost of it too, though, which is to individuals, because many individuals don't know that they're being paid in this way. And then they discover when they have to take time off for maternity leave, for example, or statutory sick leave, that they're not entitled to maternity pay or statutory sick pay because their employer hasn't been making the appropriate contributions unbeknownst to them. So it's serious for the employees as well as for the Exchequer. We'll be dealing with this particular loophole in the budget as part of a much wider package of measures to deal further with tax avoidance and tax evasion.
And you say you learned this as a sort of tip-off from a constituent in Inverness Airport?
I did. It was a few months back, and a guy came up to me at the airport and said very recently his payroll and his company had been changed. It had gone from being paid through the UK to being paid through an offshore.
Sorry, apologies for that tape there. It seems to be a little out of sync, so we'll speak to Professor John Curtis. John, it was interesting to hear what Jo Swinson was saying about Lord Renard there. It was quite a stout defence. She's been at the centre of that media storm, as I was saying, but there she really kind of came out fighting there, so that inquiry is ongoing. Yes,
indeed. In a sense, the Liberal Democrats have been hoping to kind of quell the media storm, and to some degree they've succeeded post-Eastleigh by having these 2 commissions, including a commission to look at how they should improve their procedures in future. Of course, in a sense, it partly postpones the day. It does therefore mean these commissions will report in a few weeks' time, and doubtless then the issue will once again come back, at least for a while, into the media storm. And I think it will be interesting to see at that point whether or not indeed the party can indeed come up with proposals that deal with the allegations, which again we must make absolutely clear here. Lord Renard strenuously denies these allegations, but then anyway, that when such allegations are made, that they are indeed in what's regarded as being an appropriate manner. So I think in partly the story has just been postponed until a few weeks down the track.
It's been interesting to see that she didn't speak much. Channel 4 News were always trying to contact her, always trying to contact Lynn Featherstone as well. Cathy Newman spoke to Nick Clegg on that radio show, but now she set it out at the conference and was quite clear there as well.
Yes, I mean, I think that the truth is, in a sense, I mean, Jo Swinson is clearly not denying that she heard these allegations, that she took them forward. She's not wholly denying the possibility that maybe they may not have been dealt with as appropriately as possible. But on the other hand, she's not being explicit about whatever criticism she may or may not privately have about the way in which they were handled. And evidently, there's an implication in what she's saying is that certainly what she said wasn't entirely ignored. And of course, one of the implications that at least some people have drawn from what we know so far is that Chris Renard's resignation in 2009 may not at least have been absolutely wholly unconnected with the fact that the leader's office had become aware that there were these allegations. There may well have been other reasons to why he resigned, including the fact that he himself said that his health wasn't good, but therefore maybe as a result Nick Clegg and those around him were not entirely unhappy to see him go, given some of the allegations that have been surrounding him.
And she did point to the fact there was more of an institutional problem at Westminster about this.
Well, sure, of course. I mean, you know, one of the constant issues about the House of Commons is that indeed, you know, women still remain very much substantially in a minority, and therefore is it the kind of place where, as a result, you know, it tends to be rather too male, too macho, where therefore as a result women are not treated necessarily with adequate respect, and therefore this kind of sexist behaviour, you know, that's a long complaint. Now I think that's obviously somewhat different from the fact what the allegations were made here, which were to do with, you know, supposedly sexually inappropriate behaviour. I don't think anybody's necessarily suggesting that MPs are wildly doing that, but, you know, behaving in a way towards women that perhaps is not necessarily respectful is not necessarily something that is always as good as it should be.
John, thanks for just now. OK, let's go back to that Danny Alexander interview now.
So you're saying there the road is long, the road is hard, it's tougher than you expected. Is it possible you're on the wrong road, that you're following the wrong policies, that you've got it wrong?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, actually, what you see with this government, I think, is we've been unflinching in dealing with the deficit, but we've not been unthinking. We've allowed the automatic stabilisers in the economy to operate, so that when we've seen lower growth, we've picked that up with extra borrowing to take account of the lower tax receipts rather than cutting further in response to it. We've shifted resources where we can from current spending into capital spending. I talked a lot about infrastructure today. It's something that's very important to me personally. We've focused more resources in road investment, in rail investment, in broadband investment, things that are very important to Scotland and where the Scottish Government, frankly, could do a lot more.
You confirmed in your speech today there'll be a spending review. You'll be holding a spending review after the budget. Already we're getting ministers like Philip Hammond saying, don't cut defence. We're getting your own colleague, own party colleague Vince Cable saying, you know, leave my sector alone. That's a fair old touch. I mean, you joked about the, what was it, the National Union of Ministers, but I mean, this is real government, internal government disloyalty, isn't it?
Well, look, of course, departmental ministers have got a perfect right to argue the case for the things that they believe in their budgets. Well, look, people are entitled to behave how they want. What I was saying in my speech was, we're going to carry on with this process. We have to find many billions of pounds more spending reductions for that single year, financial year 2015-16. We're going to do that in as responsible a way as we can.
Will have consequentials for Scotland of reducing...
It will have consequentials for Scotland, of course it will. It will have consequentials all around the country.
Scottish spending will be cut as a consequence.
Well, my job will be to make sure that the choices we make are done as fairly and as responsibly as possible. The precise consequences for Scotland will depend on the mix of departmental spending, because the Barnett formula is applied automatically to the totals that we set out. So I can't give you a figure for Scotland because we haven't seen how the different departments will fare. But I think what we have to do is first root out every drop of waste and overspending in Whitehall. Secondly, we have to look at the way we deliver public services. I want to see more localism, more control for individuals and communities. And then we've got to husband our resources, our scarce resources, to do the things that make the most difference to economic growth. Vince Cable yesterday was highlighting the importance of our massive increase in apprenticeships, our investment in science, which is such an important part of the Scottish economy. You know, these are areas where, by making tough decisions in other parts of spending, we've been able to keep the resources available for those issues. Supporting growth has to be a key part of the spending round too.
Minister, you talked in your speech about independence. Let me give you a couple of quotes from yourself. In June 2012, you warned that independent Scotland would lose its AAA credit rating. You depicted that as calamitous and pushing up mortgages under independence. And yet in February 2013, when Britain actually lost her AAA rating, you said, well, it doesn't matter, it's just one benchmark amongst many. Surely that's inconsistent.
The point I was making about an independent Scotland is, of course, an independent Scotland starts with no credit rating. It starts with no track record in the markets. It doesn't have the depth of financial markets that the UK has. It doesn't have the record of credibly issuing debt and repaying it over a long period of time that the UK has. All of those things will weigh very heavily on the ability of an independent Scotland to issue bonds at a reasonable price. And I think that is a very important part of what the Scottish Government have to explain about what independence actually means. One of the things I found interesting over the past few months is the way their case falls apart.
You were talking about AAA rating as being a fabby-doo thing that Scotland would lose at its peril, and then suddenly Britain loses and it doesn't matter all that.
Well, I've always said that in judging the British economy, the credit rating agencies are not the be-all and end-all. They are one benchmark, but what actually matters...
So why terrify the Scots about it?
What actually matters most is the ability of a country to command fiscal credibility. That credibility manifests itself in terms of low interest rates. What we see when you look at the projections for an independent Scotland in terms of oil revenues declining over time, the demographic challenges greater than in the rest of the UK, you see an ever-widening fiscal gap, which the Scottish Government have revealed to themselves in private, even if they don't want to talk about it publicly. That fiscal gap will have to be dealt with if an independent Scotland wishes to command credibility in the financial markets. I think that's going to be a real challenge if Scotland ever does vote to become independent. And I think the safety and security and the depth and strength of the United Kingdom help Scotland to benefit from the very low interest rates that the UK can command. That's not something Scotland could rely on if it became independent.
Final thought, Minister, you mentioned oil in the context of independence. Tavish Scott in his speech said that Shetland had a call upon the oil revenues and the oil resources. And he said to the First Minister, it's not your oil, Alex, it's ours. Do you accept that argument? Do you accept Shetland has got a call upon oil revenues and oil resources?
Well, I didn't hear the debate this morning. I've sadly missed Tavish's speech, but I know that there are very strong feelings in Orkney and Shetland that whilst they're happy within the overall United Kingdom framework, they feel that if Scotland was to be given a say on independence, if Scotland were to vote to become independent, people in Orkney and Shetland would like a say for themselves.
So it's only Shetland's oil under Scottish independence? Well, surely that case could be made right now.
That's the argument that Tavish, as I understand it, was making in his speech today. And I think that's another, if you like, another area of uncertainty.
But if Shetland...
hold on, Brian, it's an important point. It's another area of uncertainty that yet again casts a shadow over the SNP's plans for independence. They've wanted it for 80 years, that they still don't seem to be answering the most basic questions about what it would mean.
So it's only Shetland's oil under independence. You're not prepared to contemplate that at the moment. You could do it tomorrow. You're in the Treasury.
Well, the point I'm making is that is an argument that Shetlanders are making. The argument that Shetlanders are making, the argument that was in our motion. What I'm saying is, it is another area of uncertainty for an independent Scotland. I haven't looked into all the legal documentation and so on that has been talked about. But look, there is clearly something that people on those islands feel strongly about. That if Scotland becomes independent, they want their own say. I haven't done all the research into the legalities behind that, but what I do know is it's yet another piece of uncertainty that calls into question the economic case that's been made by the SNP for independence, and I think yet again strengthens the argument that we're better together within the UK.
Finally, Minister, coalition is said to be based upon three things: a very firm policy platform agreed between the two sides, intermediaries to just keep the glue in the coalition going, and good personal relationships at the very top. Do you get on well with George Osborne?
Yeah, I do get on reasonably well with George Osborne. We work closely together. We have robust arguments. We have disagreements about policy, but we have good personal relations, and I think that's important. I think in any government, actually, it is much healthier for people to be able to work together constructively, as people do in businesses, in the BBC, I'm sure, and across life. It's only in politics where somehow there's an assumption that you're not capable of working with someone because they're of a different political colour.
Danny Alexander, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury there, and now Willie Rennie is taking his place at the podium for his leader's speech. Let's listen to that now.
100 years ago, a remarkable Scot was born. A Scot who is responsible for us being here today, who had an astounding mind, enduring belief and incredible loyalty, and who took this party from the fringes to the mainstream. Joe Grimmett. Many of our older members are members because of Joe. That tells those of us who never met him that he was one of the remarkable characters of the last century. And remarkable still because he never held government office. I still draw on him as an inspiration when I took what I need to do for us, the party, and for Scotland. Joe inspired a whole generation with his radical ideas and the way in which he challenged the establishment from first to last. He called for a federal United Kingdom in 1950 in his maiden speech, and for employee share ownership in his final contribution to the House of Lords 40 years later. He even managed to question the government on whether they would meet the Dalai Lama. He knew we should try to change the world. He wanted to build that strong economy and a fair society so that everyone had a chance to get on. He was for the greater good. And we mark with gratitude 100 years. Like Joe, the Liberal Democrats mean a lot to me. It's not just because those liberal values of fairness, opportunity and the greater good run through my bones. It's not just because of our heritage. It's because we share those values and that heritage together. When it's hard, when our opponents gang up against us, we are there for each other. Our outstanding win against all the odds in Eastleigh was one of those moments. Through all the noise, heat, the fog, the value of the Liberal Democrats shone bright. To everyone who rallied round on the phones, on the streets, in the offices, to Liberal youth members who got their first taste of victory, and most of all, to Mike Thornton, the new Liberal Democrat MP for Eastleigh. Mike, thanks for all that you do and have done for the party and all that you do and have done for your community. Your win against the odds was fantastic for everyone in this party, and we are tremendously grateful for that. We've got a bit of a track record for winning against the odds. Modesty forbids me from... But hey-ho, it's not a conference if I don't mention it. The other end of Fife, wasn't that long ago, we won that famous victory against the odds. Remember the circumstances. And we're turning our fortunes round again. A few months ago, we went from 2% to 26% in Kirkintilloch. And only 3 weeks ago, we slashed Labour's majority in Rutherglen, increasing our vote while all others fell. David Bailey's campaign, with our friend Robert Brown at his side, is an inspiration to us all. Thank you, David, and thank you, Robert. And there's other opportunities in the coming weeks to show that we're ready to win again. On the 2nd of May, there are 2 council by-elections. I want everyone here, to go to Caithness, Landward and to go to Melrose, and if not, get on those phones. This is another time for the Scottish Liberal Democrat family to come together. I want us to win, and with your help, we can win. Farhana Alam is an intelligent young mother of a young daughter. I met her at the ceremony to celebrate Scottish Asian women's achievements in Glasgow last week. I helped judge the awards. Just after her daughter's first birthday, Farhana was diagnosed with breast cancer, a devastating discovery for the modest psychology graduate. For enduring the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy, the operations, she's an inspiration. But it's not that for what she went through, actually what really inspires me is what she did next. She has dedicated herself to assisting other young women with their battles against cancer. She speaks to hundreds of Asian women about her experiences and the taboo of cancer. It is that personal commitment, despite her experience, to aid her community that is truly inspirational. It restores faith that we are there, not just for ourselves, but for one another. Beyond the here and now, not just me, the greater good. That's why I'm in politics. That's why I want change. Where we think and do beyond what we need to others in need, the future, people on the other side of the globe, the greater good. That's sometimes a hard call when we demand instant results before the next electoral test. But it's looking beyond the immediate interest that will serve this country well. It's why I'm proud that it is our country that has committed to one of the biggest aid budgets in the whole world. It's why I'm proud we won the case to invest in a green future, looking beyond our immediate needs. A plan on renewables that will lead the charge against climate change. It's why I'm proud we are working to get the economy back on track for the long term. It's why I'm proud we are cutting tax for those on low and middle incomes, delivering a £600 tax cut for those who need it most, led by Nick Clegg, who spoke so powerfully yesterday. We are building a strong economy in a fairer society so that everyone has a chance to get on aid, on the climate, on the economy, on fair tax. It is the Liberal Democrats that are making the difference. The SNP are making a difference too. It's not quite such a positive difference. For years they've told us that if only we had the magical powers of independence, we could solve all known problems. But we've had a sneak peek behind the veil, a leaked report that shows they fear independence almost as much as everyone else does. They fear the volatile oil revenue. They fear the cuts to pensions. They fear the loss of public service jobs. Well, I have a message to John Swinney and Alex Salmond. Don't worry. At this rate, there is no fear you're going to win. That leaked government paper on oil revenues saw the Scottish Government fandango from considerable uncertainty to little doubt in just 4 days. But with the troubles in the independence camp comes big responsibility for the Liberal Democrats. After the good work by Sir Ming Campbell and his Home Rule Commission, we are providing a lead in the campaign for more powers for the Scottish Parliament. A massive transfer of financial and constitutional power is the lasting settlement. Our plan for Home Rule in a federal UK is gathering support from a wide range of bodies and thinkers, from Reform Scotland's Devo Plus to Devo More from the IPPR. A consensus is emerging. Now that Joanne Lamont's group will report soon, we're making progress, with a Conservative leader Speaking of a federal UK, we are perhaps very near a breakthrough moment. It is possible to develop the consensus that no in the referendum actually means yes to more powers. I make a direct appeal to the SNP. I don't expect you to concede the referendum, well, quite yet. What I hope is that you are preparing your case for more powers if you do lose. There is a place ready for you at that table. Be ready. That breakthrough moment is possible with a meeting of minds across the political spectrum. A breakthrough for a lasting, settled solution. And it is the Liberal Democrats that seek solutions. We are constructive, seek consensus where possible, and work for that greater good. When we met in Dunfermline, I spoke about investing in the poorest 2-year-olds to give them the best start in life. I spoke about the Nobel laureate James Heckman and his passion. I spoke about giving 24,000 2-year-olds nursery education every week, just like we're delivering in England. You voted for the motion and I took our costed plan directly to the Scottish Government. Yet the SNP said no. Alex Salmond said he was listening, but he didn't. John Swinney said he was up for change, but he wasn't. And Education Secretary Mike Russell, he didn't say anything at all. So the SNP rejected our plans. But I can promise you now, I will not rest until this government is matching its words with action and commits to giving our 2-year-olds a chance. It's important so that Scottish mothers of young children can go out and earn for their family, knowing their children are getting the best start in life. A chance to make a different life. A chance to contribute to society and the economy. A chance to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. That's the kind of fairer society I want to see. It's unfortunate that the SNP don't listen to us more often. Perhaps if they had listened to Tavish Scott, we would not be facing the current open warfare between the chairman and the chief constable of our new centralised police force. Before the new force even exists, they've achieved some astounding feats. Turned civilian staff against police staff. Turned the police authority against the police. And turned their backs against local communities. It's remarkable. But they have turned our crime-fighting force to an in-fighting force. And meanwhile, hundreds of police support staff still have no idea where they will be working or even if they have a job. Our party should be very proud of Alison McInnes for leading the case against centralisation. I hope she scares you, because she certainly scares me. She's challenged many of them. She's challenged the SNP absolutely every step of the way. In our debate in Parliament this week, by going through the bill line by line with patience and determination, and in the heat of the parliamentary chamber, standing up to the First Minister. In a democratic system, we would be able to do something about this mess. In a democratic system, we would be able to hold people to account. But democracy in our police was scrapped when the Nationalists decided to appoint all the top posts on long contracts at the whim of the Minister. We know we need a new law to sort out the chaos of the single police. But we need to go further. We need a new law to give democratically elected people the chance to sort this out and put some democracy back into our police. When you say Kenny McCaskill, you see the contrast with our Scottish ministers. Take Mike Moore, our very own Secretary of State for Scotland. He calmly and professionally charmed the nationalists back to back the Scotland Bill. That they had previously, and remember this, they previously described the Scotland Bill as a poison pill. He outmanoeuvred one of his predecessors, the wily Michael Forsyth, to sensibly grant the legal power for the referendum to the Scottish Government. And he is proving to be more than a match for Alex Salmond on debating the merits of the United Kingdom. He's been so successful that he has been dubbed Scotland's James Bond. Now, I know Mike's secretly pleased with his title. I suppose I am too. My only regret is that I had hoped to get there first. It's time, I think, for a James Bond from Fife. I modestly suggest I could do that. A secret gadget currently disguised as a sack of coal. Shirley Bassey singing the theme, the Kelty Clippy. The Spy Who Loved Methyl. Casino Rosyth. There's more. Live and Let Dysart. And just one more. A View to Oak Hill. You can thank Matthew Clark for that one. But Mike it is. As part of the UK government's quad, Danny Alexander's capacity and intelligence has steered the coalition through one of the most challenging periods in our history. Highlander and Scot Danny Alexander is at the beating heart of this government. It's not the Conservatives that stand up for Scotland in the Cabinet, it is the Liberal Democrats. A £600 tax cut for 2 million Scots, pension increases restoring the link with earnings, a new railway sleeper service, broadband for our rural communities, the island fuel discount, a green investment bank, building a stronger economy and a fairer society so that everyone gets a chance to get on. And in Joe Swinson, we have a minister who is prepared to take on the rich and the powerful, making sure everyone has a chance by cracking down on the payday loan charlatans who run lives and ruin families. On the side of consumers against vested interests, on the grocery code and credit card charges. Helping families with flexible working and shared parental leave. 3 Scots, 3 Liberal Democrats working for the greater good. Scottish Liberal Democrats for Scotland in government. For the thousands of people out of work, for the many more who have been forced to go part-time, for all those who have seen their pay fall in value, for everyone who has seen their fuel bills rise, prices at the pump soar, and the cost of living grow, we understand. We understand that there is anxiety as to whether this period will ever end. We know the realities. We are not alone in the world, but that doesn't make it any easier for those struggling to make ends meet. The headwinds are strong, but we have the power in our hands to shape our way of life. It's not a return to the old ways, but to a sustainable, enduring, long-term economy that lives within the constraints of our environment and natural resources. It's an economy in which everyone gets a chance, the chance to contribute, to participate and enjoy the fruits of a sustainable future. We need the talents and efforts of everyone to be a successful country. I know we can do that right now here in Scotland. It's why it's so important that we invest in education for €2 to give the families, those families, the chance to break the cycle of poverty. It's why we need to invest in colleges to give people new skills for new jobs. It's why the SNP need to work in partnership with the UK on the £1 billion youth contract, so that young people can get their first chance in a job. And it's why our plans to unlock £1.5 billion from Scottish Water can fund childcare, skills and new jobs, loans for businesses to help them grow, energy efficiency measures in homes for our environment, superfast broadband, science research in Scotland's universities. These are the kind of positive priorities that will reshape the way our economy works. It's looking to the long-term interest, not the short-term gain. And it is the short-term that is holding us back. The Scottish Government's obsession with the behind-the-scenes patch-up job on the referendum is suffocating the country's long-term interest. The Futures Trust was supposed to spend £300 million on schools and hospitals this year. They managed just 20. The SNP got £103 million from the fossil fuel levy for renewable energy, but siphoned off 15 within months. They got £400 million extra in capital from the UK government, but decided to hold back 200. The message to the Scottish Government has to be, don't demand £400 million in capital, keep back 200 for a rainy day in the referendum campaign. Don't demand the release of the fossil fuel levy for green energy if you're not going to use it. Don't dismiss our constructive ideas for Scottish Water just for a tired, cheap slogan. And don't tell us you have a shovel-ready list if it's not ready for your shovel. None of this is putting our Scottish economy first. For goodness sake, open your mind. Look beyond the referendum. Look at the real practical steps that can be taken right now for the greater good. The SNP need to listen carefully. Stop confusing our nation's ambition with your obsession. To help David Bailey in the great Rutherglen by-election campaign, David's right here beside us, I inquired of an old lady whether she'd be supporting David to be her next councillor. She gave the smallest, most subtle nod that I have ever encountered. In fact, I thought it was really just a tick rather than a nod. Inquiring further, I sought confirmation that I had read her tick correctly. In return, she whispered this: "Yes, but don't tell anyone." She was a comic. She was definitely voting for David. She respects us in government, and she approved of David Bailey's efforts for the local community. But she was intimidated by the noisy opponents of the party. Her vote helped David secure that great result. Along with hundreds of others, she backed the Lib Dems. The lesson I learned that day is that we must instill confidence in those who support us, but fear speaking out for us. We need their voice to build our case. That's why it's important to tell people about our work with conviction and belief. just like Joe Grimmond, who told others about the Liberal cause with conviction and belief. Joe's 100-year legacy is strong, from the fringes to government, from a voice on the backbenches to delivering change on the front bench. So no more whispering. Speak up for the Rutherglen lady. Speak up for what we have achieved. Speak up for Joe. Speak up for the greater good.
That was Willie Rennie, the Scottish Lib Dem leader, speaking at his party's conference in Dundee, shaking hands there with the new MP for Eastleigh. He was talking about Joe Grimmond, an inspiration for the party, saying they were there for each other. He was urging party members to go out to support candidates in council by-elections, and he was speaking the main theme about the greater good. He called to the SNP to look beyond the referendum and take practical steps for the greater good. And that's the hall there in Dundee. Professor John Curtis is still with me here in the studio. John, that seemed to be almost the main theme, and I suppose it reflects what they're trying to do in the coalition as they see it in their eyes.
Well, I think so. Yeah. I mean, the main theme of the speech, in a sense, it was the same theme as Nick Clegg's yesterday, which is trying to persuade the faithful that they have indeed turned the electoral corner, and that they can now look forward to a better prospects in future, but urging them to get out on the streets, to put forward the campaign, including this theme that Nick Clegg has now clearly wanted to promote. It on the one hand, if you want a fair society, but also you want a strong economy, that this is the party to go for. And that theme was then underpinned by what you might anticipate, which was on the one hand some defence of the record of the coalition government at Westminster, and some attacks on the SNP government for allegedly being rather slow in spending the money. But in truth, the most interesting part of the speech was a little bit in the middle, and it was the bit that we were told we were going to be there at the beginning of this morning in this morning's newspapers, and that was his comments about moving forward, as he sees it, the proposals for more devolution, and in particular his insistence to the SNP that in the event of a no vote, there would be a place for them on the table. Now, I think there's a couple of things that are interesting to say about that. I mean, the first is that if indeed Willie Rennie is right, and that there is a prospect of a consensus emerging this side of the referendum between his party, the Labour Party and the Conservatives. And I think in truth we'll see whether or not that's true when we see what the Labour Party unveils in a few weeks' time. But if he's right, a consensus begins to emerge. It's quite difficult to see how the SNP is then going to be able to do anything to change that consensus in 2 years' time. I mean, if that consensus emerged, in a sense, the SNP, I think, are likely to be given something to say, well, essentially, either accept this or not. The second question to ask is whether or not, indeed, that consensus that the Unionist parties like to come up with is something that the SNP will want to buy into. At the moment, it looks like a consensus, for example, that does not suggest very much at all, if anything, in the way of the devolution of welfare benefits. Yet that's one of the themes where the SNP have been deeply critical of the UK government. And it doesn't even propose getting the Scottish Parliament to be responsible for funding all of its revenues out of taxes. And in particular, envisages, at least under Min Campbell's proposals, not giving the Scottish Government power over the rate of corporation tax. Again, something that the SNP have talked about a great deal and saying they think Scotland should have. So one has to say here again is, well, actually, even if the SNP were minded to get involved in this game, are they actually going to get anything out of the other parties that they'd be willing to buy into? If that's the case, why is Mr Rennie really trying to pursue the SNP apparently as hard as he is?
OK, John, thanks for just now. Let's go back to the hall now. Our political editor, Brian Taylor, has hot-footed it from there, and he joins us again now. Brian, we're just picking out some of the couple of the key themes from the speech, the greater good, the coalition government, that's why they went into coalition, and this call for the SNP to get round the table. What did you make of the speech?
Well, Mr Rennie had the good sense to say that he doesn't expect them to, the SNP to respond instantly to that, and of course they won't, because they don't countenance the prospect of losing the referendum. I think what he's doing is setting out a strategy that works post-referendum if, on his presumption is correct, and the referendum vote goes no. He's setting out the possibility of there being further powers. I think there's something of a quandary for the parties defending the union, because they are at different stages in their views on what the alternative to independence might be. They're facing the challenge from the SNP, who say, we know what a yes vote is, it's independence, we will set out the details of that in the white paper, Scottish Government white paper in November. We don't know precisely what a no vote means, because we don't know exactly what the alternative would be. We have a proposal from the Liberal Democrats. We have a commission, with the interim report of which will go to the Labour conference in a couple of weeks or a few weeks' time. And we have the Conservatives talking broadly about more powers, but more powers potentially after the referendum outcome has gone. Do I think there'll be a composite position? No, I don't. I don't think there's enough time, frankly, or indeed the will, or probably the potential outcome. In other words, they don't all agree on a common position. So I don't think we'll see that. What I think we will see is what Mr. Rennie was talking about there, which is the idea of the opposition parties at Holyrood presenting the prospect of there being further powers, the definition of that to come thereafter should the independence referendum result in a no vote.
OK, Brian, thanks for just now. Coming up later in the programme, the Northern Ireland certainly have a distinct character about them, but do they have a distinct political future as well? Now, let's speak to the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Willie Rennie, who's just fresh from addressing delegates there. He joins us now from the conference venue. Good afternoon, Mr. Rennie. Thanks for joining us so quickly. First of all,
my heart's still thumping, Andrew.
Yes, standing ovation there from the delegates. First of all, let's get to the point you were making about the greater good. That seemed to be one of the main themes for your speech. Pretty controversial, your party being in the coalition, but you're saying it is for the greater good of the UK and for Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's a danger that we just look to the immediate future, to the referendum, to the crisis that we've got now, and it's right that we do that, but we also need to look to the longer term for the greater good. And that's why I think it's really important to focus on the environment, dealing with some of the big challenges there, but also things like international aid to help people in other parts of the world. That's the kind of country I want to see, and I think Liberal Democrats have got an important role in making sure that politics focuses on that and delivers on that.
Unfortunately, the coalition government doesn't really seem to be delivering. When it comes to the nation's finances, things are in a terrible shape. It looks like George Osborne will miss his borrowing targets. It's not really working for the Lib Dems and the Tories and the coalition government as you search for very elusive growth.
I mean, there's no doubt it's tough just now. I mean, it's tough almost all over the globe. It's tough. But we're confident in our strategy of spending as much as we possibly can to stimulate the economy, whilst keeping our finances under control so that we don't unsettle the markets. It's about creating jobs and growth for the future, and that's what the strategy now. Of course it's rocky, of course it's bumping along, but what we need to do is to stick to that plan. Don't be unthinking about it, but we need to stick to the plan nevertheless.
Now, we hear a lot about Lib Dem values at this conference, and you were talking also about trying to reshape the economy. But if we look at some of the figures from the UK coalition government as we approach the budget this year, benefits have been cut by £3.4 billion, but there's been tax cuts of £4.2 billion. It's hardly Lib Dem vision, is it?
I mean, what we've done with tax, as you know, Andrew, is cut tax for those in low and middle incomes. £600 for those who need it most. I mean, I think that's a tremendous advance. It's actually something that Labour never did in their whole time in office. We've also made sure that those with the broadest shoulders bear the greatest burden, and that's why tax for those on the higher incomes are paying more. Of course, with the welfare system, we need to make sure that we make work pay, so we encourage people out of benefits and into work. These things are tough, but actually we need to do these things with sensitivity and care to make sure they work effectively. But what we are doing is delivering that kind of strong economy, fairer society. That's what we're really after. That's why the tax cuts for those on low and middle incomes is so important that we deliver.
Well, yes, that's your Lib Dem values, but of course at this conference we've seen Lib Dem values perhaps coming to the fore, challenging the party leadership. You've been challenged on the issue about secret courts, which the Lib Dem supported at Westminster, and the party faithful there have also challenged the leadership on the so-called bedroom tax. These are hardly Lib Dem values, are they?
I mean, it actually shows we're a pretty vibrant party that's prepared to challenge the leadership. We have open debates at these conferences, and that's a good thing.
Well, why are you not standing by the party faithful then? Why are they having to challenge you?
Well, there's an ongoing debate, as I was going to say, Andrew. It's what we're doing, for instance, with the bedroom tax, as you would describe it and others would describe it, welfare reform, is making sure that it's implemented sensitively. I've been working with our colleagues at Westminster to make sure it's implemented with that sensitivity. And also, in terms of the secret courts, there's quite a bit of a way to go before we come to the end of that debate, and that's why these debates at party conferences are useful. Now, I think other parties may hide those debates away behind closed doors. We certainly don't do that.
Now, turning to the case for the independence referendum, and you were making the point in your speech that the SNP should prepare the case for more powers if they lose. That's not really a very realistic prospect. They're not really going to even countenance that, are they?
Well, I think, I'm sure you heard Brian Taylor earlier on just saying that I had reflected that I don't expect the SNP to concede the referendum before polling day. I don't expect them to do that. But what I know, and I hope they are doing behind the scenes, is preparing their plans for what happens if people vote no. And that's really important, because if we're going to get that long-term sustainable constitutional settlement that I want, and I'm sure most people want in Scotland, then we need the SNP on board. We shouldn't stitch it up, exclude them, leave them out of the debate. They need to be involved. And that's why it's important that they're doing that work now, just like we are with our plans for Home Rule and a federal UK, and also the Labour Party and the Tories are doing as well.
But if there is a hope for a constitutional settlement, if there is a no vote in the referendum, you need a consensus with the unionist parties, don't you? Jeremy Purvis from Devo Plus called for that Glasgow agreement, and you're maybe hopeful of that. But how hopeful are you of Labour and the Conservatives joining together for that?
Well, I mean, look at how far we've travelled. Look at how far we've travelled just in a few months. I mean, Ruth Davidson has moved from a line in the sand, and she's now talking about federalism. That's quite a transfer. If you look at what Joanne's got, Joanne Lamont's got a report coming out next month at their party conference in Inverness. That's really positive. Now, we've got a bit of time to go before we get to the referendum. We shouldn't have something stitched up in advance of the referendum, but I think a consensus is emerging. A consensus is emerging around, I mean, basically, we want the majority of the money that we spend in the Scottish Parliament to be raised by the Scottish Parliament, so we have much more control over our own destiny and decisions. Rather than depending on a grant from Westminster, we make the calls about how much we're going to raise and how much we're going to spend. Now, I think the SNP and the other parties can come around that consensus, and it certainly seems to be developing.
Now, if you do get to that point of Home Rule, how long do you think that position is sustainable if Scots are paying for most of what happens here in Scotland and just sending money to Westminster for foreign affairs and defence? How long is it before, do you think, people start to question if there should be full independence?
Well, it's pretty clear that most people seem to want to stay in the UK from the current polls. In fact, a lot of people fear independence. Getting on to 60%, fear it to one degree or another. So I actually think this is the lasting constitutional settlement that we've been seeking for some time. Because what people will be able to do is, if the people in Scotland want to do something different, they'll be able to do it on the domestic agenda, whilst getting the best of both worlds with the rest of the UK. And just to correct you, Andrew, what we're not suggesting is that Scotland raises all the taxes. We're suggesting it's a shared arrangement. So Westminster raises some taxes and Scotland raises the majority of the money that we spend on the domestic agenda.
Yes, but it would be a majority.
That way, I think we can get a sustainable solution. Sorry, Andrew? Sorry?
Yes, but it would be a majority of the taxes.
Yeah, it would be a majority of the money that we spend in the Scottish Parliament. Remember, there's defence and foreign affairs and international aid and all those issues that are dealt with by Westminster. That, I believe, can be a sustainable solution for the longer term. And I think most people, Devo Plus, Reform Scotland's group, and the IPPR with Devo More, they've come up with broadly similar plans to what we've got. I think that's encouraging, and I think the other parties will coalesce around that, because people know, not just in Scotland but across the UK, that what we've got just now is not sustainable, but our plans are.
Right. Finally, I just want to kind of gauge the mood of the party. I mean, your leadership has been praised. You have received some plaudits that you're always on the go, always trying to set the bar high for the Lib Dems. But is there a feel at this conference of a kind of a parish pump feel almost as you talk about these local council by-elections in a kind of rather small room with your 5 MSPs? It's perhaps not like the old days, is it?
I think you should be here, Andrew. You would feel the passion, the belief in the Liberal Democrat cause that's endured us through many, many, many years. People enjoy this party, they love this party. That's why we can get through these difficult times. You should come to the conference. I'll buy you a drink because actually you'll really enjoy the feeling here. People really love this party, and it's shown through the passion, through the speeches. You should hear some of them. The mental health debate yesterday was one of the best debates that we've had at this conference. People speaking from personal experience and passion. And I think that's a great thing. That shows this party is alive and kicking. I think everybody out there should come and join us, because I think they'll love it.
Well, Willie Rennie, I'll hold you to that promise. Thank you very much for joining me just now. Thank you. Now, just as Willie Rennie was mentioning there, one of the most powerful moments of the conference came yesterday during the debate on tackling Scotland's rising mental health problems. Delegates heard how poor mental health is a major problem for people of a working age. But it was the individual experiences of some of the speakers, such as Ewan Hoyle, which starkly illustrated the personal heartache of mental illness.
I have a brother with schizophrenia. It has been a hugely traumatic thing for my family to deal with over the last 17 years. And I sadly don't see anything in this motion that may have spared us that trauma. Oh, Jesus. This is a fairly solid, well-meaning mental health motion, and I'm sorry I couldn't have engaged earlier in an attempt to improve it. But I'm here now, so I have to take this opportunity to encourage the party to additionally focus its efforts on the key issues of prevention and early intervention. Schizophrenia is a condition that can render young people a traumatising burden for the rest of their lives. It usually first appears in someone's late teens or in... Oh, Jesus. I'll get back to you.
I'm not going to say to you what I was going to say. What I have here is Ewan's speech. Okay, Ewan was here to tell you that he wanted to take this opportunity to encourage the party to additionally focus its efforts on the key issues of prevention and early intervention. Schizophrenia is a condition that can render young people a traumatising burden for the rest of their lives. It usually first appears in someone's late teens or early 20s and affects approximately 1% of the population. Why are we not preparing school children for the distinct possibility themselves, a family member or friend, might start to lose their grip on rationality and reality? Ewan has said this to a UK Government Health Minister's face, and he wants it to be said again to all of us today. He would have given his all for the knowledge to identify the warning signs of his brother's impending deterioration. The knowledge that could allow him to do the right thing in good time, to allow him to cling on to reality and eventually return to a chance at happiness and fulfilment. Why do we spend hours teaching the fictional breakdown of Hamlet or the poems of Philip Larkin, when we could be teaching our children how to safeguard their real-life mental health and how to look out for and respond appropriately to the deterioration of their family and their friends? We should be the party, and I'm speaking for himself and for me now, we should be the party that aspires for a society in which it is easier to find happiness and easier to avoid sadness and trauma. Thank you.
Ewan's speech got to me a lot. Not because I'm like him, not because I have a brother or sister who is a mental health sufferer, because I am one. And it made me realise the pain that my mother must go through. The day before my German exam last year, the stress got too much for me. I'd had a fight with my girlfriend, and the world seemed like it was against me. And I overdosed on my mother's heart medication. I woke up the next day, went downstairs, and I collapsed onto the floor. And the next thing I knew, I was in A&E in Dumfries. It took me 3 months from trying to commit suicide to going to CBT. 3 months, I self-harmed twice a month, almost like clockwork, because that's the only way I could cope. This motion deals with so many important things: stigma, talking therapies, art therapies, all of which are extremely important. Mental health is often seen as a secondary thing to physical health. It is just as much as a danger. It is just as bad. And the pain and agony that goes on when your head is turning against you is that no cancer can ever be. It's the feeling of you're lost, you're hopeless, and you would take anything. You would take death, you would take hell, you'd take purgatory just to get rid of that pain. But there's one thing the motion doesn't mention, and I'd like to actually come to it. It doesn't mention how brilliant having fantastic families and understanding friends can be. I have a friend called Aileen McFarlane, and she's saved my life so many times. What you really need to do, voting on this motion is good. Voting on this motion is important. But if you have a friend who's suffering, hold them close and make them feel like they're not alone. Thank you.
Now, the activists have issued a strong rebuke to the party leadership by overwhelmingly rejecting support for so-called secret courts legislation yesterday. Some said the bill goes against their core values. It lets civil courts examine secret intelligence in private.
For centuries, our legal systems have been based on two principles. The first is openness. Justice is done and is seen to be done. This means the judge giving his or her decision in open court after an open hearing. The second is equality of arms, the ability of each party to know the other's case, see the evidence, challenge it, call evidence in rebuttal if necessary, and make submissions on it. Anything less, and it is just not possible for the trial to be fair. I never thought I'd see the day when this fundamental basis of fairness was interfered with. Far less that Liberal Democrat MPs would support it, as they have done with Part 2 of the Justice and Security Bill.
The debate on secret courts. Now, we saw right at the top of the programme that protests were being held in Dundee and indeed across the country over the so-called bedroom tax. It will cut benefits to people with a spare room, and the delegates have voted resoundingly to under the government's welfare reforms. Those deemed to have a spare bedroom in their council or housing association home will have their housing benefit claims reduced by £40 to £80.
This is a policy driven by problems in London and the South East, and not the best example, frankly, of decisions driven by Liberal Democrat values.
I believe that particular policy that we are discussing, the particular reforms we are discussing, are inconsistent to the social justice and equality agenda that so many of us joined this party to champion.
It's the most poorly thought out piece of policy that anybody could ever imagine.
We've had a terrific debate, but we actually haven't had a single Member of Parliament come up to this podium to defend the line from the government. Now, I wonder why that's the case. I wonder if it's perhaps because it is indefensible.
I see all those in favour of the motion. And any against? I see one hand against. That motion is carried.
Now, Brian Taylor is standing by with some delegates at the conference venue. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks very much indeed. Let's go first on that issue of the bedroom tax that we heard there. Alistair Carmichael, you're responsible for getting the votes through in the Commons and all that sort of thing. There was one vote in favour of the bedroom tax. It wasn't you by any chance?
It was. I was not, unfortunately, in the conference for that debate. But, I mean...
the government got a doing on this one, an absolute doing.
Well, look, I mean, yes, there's a degree of unhappiness about that within the party. It's no great secret. And, in fact, I think it's all credit to the party that we're prepared to have this sort of debate in public, which frankly just doesn't happen in other parties. Yeah, what a more balanced package, though, Brian, might have shown was the tremendous response that the delegates gave to other announcements, other things that Liberal Democrats are doing in government, like cutting tax for people on low and middle incomes, like the increase in the state pension, the largest ever increase in the state pension, like the lower rate of fuel duty for island communities. There's an awful lot here.
All of which issues we covered in the speeches by Nick Clegg, Willie Willie Rennie and Danny Alexander.
Indeed, and these are all things that the delegates are very happy about.
I'm sure
of course, we listen to the things that they find difficult.
Let's stick to the bedroom tax for now. We had speaker after speaker saying in there, this is an illiberal policy. We did not enter politics to bring about this sort of policy. Is there any way you can reverse it in the UK government?
Look, this is the work that Liberal Democrats within government, led by Steve Webb, who is doing a tremendous amount to get improvements to this policy, who is making money available to councils throughout the country, so that where there is going to be genuine hardship caused, where people can't necessarily move, then money will be available to help them. Unfortunately, you don't hear an awful lot of that sort of thing in the debate that you see in television.
How about the secret courts vote as well? A lot of scepticism about that.
Well, indeed, and I completely understand the scepticism. But as a parliamentarian, I'm given a choice. Do we want to do, which is sometimes suggested, and just say this is nothing to do with us, we'll have no part in this, we walk away? Or do we actually take the principles that you've heard articulated here at conference and go in, work within government and within in Parliament, and get the substantial, the enormous improvements that have already been made on that particular issue?
Liam MacArthur, these are Westminster issues, but of course, as the elections to Holyrood last year showed, Westminster issues can overspill. People don't make a distinction. Can you defend these policies on the doorstep, the bedroom tax in particular?
Well, I think it's interesting that, as Alistair says, there's no getting away from the fact that it's a difficult decision, it's a controversial area of policy. I think what we saw from the debate earlier on this week in the Scottish Parliament is there is an acknowledgement by the Labour Party that under-occupancy is an issue that needs to be tackled. I think what we've had from the SNP is outright opposition, telling us what they don't like about welfare reform, insisting that welfare reform is necessary, it needs to be more simple, it needs to be fairer, but without setting out in any detail how that would be achieved. So I think once you get into the detail of these decisions, of course emotions run high. We need to make sure, as I think has been demonstrated up until now, that where a case can be made for making improvements to the way this is implemented, that we listen to that and respond accordingly.
Amending the way it's been implemented, in other words, is what you're saying?
I think so. I mean, there's been examples of that to date. As Alistair suggested, there is a contingency fund there. There is scope for councils in terms of the way they interpret this provision as well. And I think until we see how this impacts on the ground, really a lot of this is around assertion. But there's no getting away from the fact that it's a difficult issue.
Let's turn to the third quite remarkable debate that we featured there. Kavya Kaushik, thanks for joining us as well. You took part in that debate on mental health. A series of speakers talking very passionately, very emotionally about individual circumstances, family circumstances, but then a common message saying they wanted this to produce action as well, didn't they?
The debate was very moving. I think it's a great credit to us as a party that we're able to discuss mental health in a very open forum, and for people to be in such a safe environment that they could talk about their very personal issues. Particularly one young member came forward and said, I'm going to talk about my experiences with antidepressants, and my friends have said to me, is it a good idea talking about this in a place where I could be jeopardising my future careers, there are cameras, etc. It was a very moving debate. And it was talking about decreasing the stigma with mental health, as well as looking at alternative ways to help mental health problems. So I spoke about using art therapy as opposed to spending tons and tons of money on antidepressants and putting people on long-term dependency. It's a real credit to us as a party that we're able to discuss that in an open space.
Thank you for that. Let's turn to the economy with each of you. An element mentioned in Willie Rennie's speech, that this balance, Alistair Carmichael, between attempting to address the economic woes, which he said could not be ducked, but attempting to bring in fairness as well.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. And in fact, that is in many ways the sweet spot in British politics, which we uniquely are able to occupy, because we've demonstrated by putting stability into the economy that we are in a position to take the tough decisions, but actually through policies like our tax policies, like restoring the link for the pension. I mean, remember that when the Labour Party was in power, they gave pensioners 75 pence a week increase. We have restored the link between the state pension and average earnings with the rate of inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is larger. That delivered the largest ever increase in the state pension last year. We understand the economic imperatives, but we don't lose sight of the fairness either.
Are we seeing you drawing clear from the Conservatives by some of the statements there. Nick Clegg saying you can't expect fairness from the Tories. You're in government with the Tories.
I think actually what you're seeing is a maturing of the debate about what coalition actually means, especially at Westminster. They're now getting the idea that what we're engaged in here is a 5-year fixed-term contract. It's not a live-in, it's not a marriage, it's not a merger or anything like that. It's two parties doing what the electorate actually told them to do, because the electorate did not want any single party to run the country. So the two parties have come together to bury their differences, work together where they can get agreement, and to give the country the sort of stable government that it needs at a time when it was really on the brink of economic collapse.
Liam MacArthur, I mean, you mentioned there the brink of economic collapse. It hasn't come that far away, it seems to many, from the brink of economic collapse. The economy is still struggling. The government debt deficit is still high, and you know the forecasts on growth are pretty limpid as well. How about that?
Well, I don't think anybody would dispute that. I think it's difficult to prove a negative. Where would we be had we not taken these decisions? I think Vince Cable yesterday in his speech set out a number of the reasons why growth has been as sluggish as it has. I mean, the collapse in the Eurozone has knocked confidence round the houses. The UK is not immune from that. I think in terms of exports as well, I think Vince Cable's have interesting remarks about the extent to which that hasn't taken off, despite incentives and support to try and achieve it in the way that we would have liked. So there's no shortcuts to this, but I think, as Alistair's intimated, we've set out a course, we've stuck to it, but then responded to circumstances as they've arisen, and I think it is the right approach.
Presumably the delegates trying, and party activists trying to promote the party's message on the doorstep, you could use some shortcuts, you could use some good news. It's difficult otherwise.
I mean, there's a lot of good news that we can push forward. The fact that the Lib Dems helped push forward equal marriage as a bill, that's a fantastic Lib Dem achievement. There's a lot of things that I feel that we can push forward and promote. You discussed secret courts a bit earlier, and the fact that the Lib Dems in a coalition government, we still have the European Convention of Human Rights in place, and that actually
would not be on the cabinet table to abolish it as long as he's in cabinet. Yeah.
Sorry.
Nick Clegg saying as long as he is in cabinet, that proposal would not be on a cabinet table.
Exactly. The thing with secret courts is, regardless of what happens, and you know their trials heard behind closed doors, the European Convention of Human Rights still protects it. So we still get to hear evidence across this thing.
Liam, do we need on the issue of Scottish Government and devolution, independence, etc. Again, from Willie Rennie's speech, he's talking about the Liberal Democrats being ahead of the others. Don't you need to try and get some sort of consensus between Labour and the Conservatives and yourselves to present a coherent alternative to independence to the electorate?
Well, I think as Willie made clear earlier on in your programme, we need to get the issue of whether or not we're a part of the United Kingdom out of the way first. But absolutely. But I think that doesn't obviate the need to do the groundwork. We've set out our thinking. The Conservatives are now talking about a federal structure that would just been unthinkable not so long ago. Labour are about to publish their proposals. But this debate post the referendum needs to include not just those three parties. I think it does need to include those from the nationalist movement and those of no party affiliation at all.
But Alistair, if people are going to turn down independence and go for perhaps more powers, don't they need to know what they are going for? Don't they need to know that pre-referendum, not post-referendum, as Liam MacArthur is saying?
No, because that suggests that the referendum is the end of the debate. And actually, no political party has got the power to say that. It goes back to the way that we did this in the 1990s with the Constitutional Convention, where it wasn't just the parties that came together, it was the churches, it was the unions, it was wider Civic Scotland, because that was what the Scottish people wanted.
So you like Douglas Alexander's idea of reconvening the convention?
Reconvening the Constitutional Convention is exactly the sort of thing that I think will happen, because what the Scottish people want, by way of staying part of the United Kingdom but still having a stronger parliament in Edinburgh, is what they will get because they are entitled to demand it. But it's not in the gift of any individual party. That's the thing the politicians must always remember.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all three. And I think Willie Rennie's buying drinks from what it seemed earlier. He was making an offer.
Well, that would be a first.
But he made an offer to somebody who was 85 miles away, which was nice and safe. Thanks all three. And with that, back to the studio.
Brian, thank you very much. Now, Orkney and Shetland MSPs are making the case for home rule for the islands. In his conference speech, Tavish Scott argued the Northern Isles are in a very strong position for enhanced constitutional status like that enjoyed by the Isle of Man. The Shetland MSP said they could use natural resources like oil as leverage. Our reporter in the Northern Isles, John Johnson, has been taking the political temperature in the far north.
Orkney and Shetland have always considered themselves different and distinct from the rest of Scotland. Both island communities are proud to fly their own flag and celebrate their Norse ancestry. Each year Shetlanders celebrate their Viking heritage in the Uphellia Fire Festival. In Orkney they mark Norwegian Constitution Day with a parade through the streets of Kirkwall. Many of the place names in both islands stem from Old Norse language.
Orkney and Shetland were overrun by Vikings in the 9th century. For the next 500 years they were part of Scandinavia. From the 1460s and 1470s they became indissolubly part of Scotland.
The islands are known too for their fiddle music. There's also a rich dialect in both communities.
Wherever we are, there is something north by. Only at the pole with a compass barrel seek magnetic certainty.
This cultural difference and physical detachment may explain why the Northern Isles appear sceptical about the prospects of Scottish independence.
Northern Isles MSPs Tavish Scott and Liam MacArthur argue that voters in the far north are in a position to use their natural resources like oil, fishing and renewable energy as a lever to call for more powers for the islands.
Local democracy in action at the town hall in Lerwick. The council convener agrees the islands have cards to play, but also sees a debate on independence as an opportunity to protect what powers the islands have.
We've got to try and stop those moves towards centralisation. So we've got to retain what we have, and then we've got to look at areas where we can actually do things better locally. So I'm thinking along things like fisheries, the Crown Estates. Devolution shouldn't stop at Edinburgh.
And that view is shared in Orkney.
It's definitely different here. We're a peripheral area and we're surrounded by a sea that contains all the marine resources that have contributed to making the country so prosperous, be it fish, be it oil or the marine renewables in which so much hope is placed in the future. The issue whether Scotland remains part of the United Kingdom can be viewed as, well, should the islands remain part of Scotland, should the islands remain part of the United Kingdom?
A fresh catch of brown and velvet crabs. Shetland got some autonomy in 2001 when local fishermen were given the right to manage their own inshore fishery. The island seafood industry is worth around £300 million to the local economy. But fishermen say with all the regulations from Europe, there's little scope for the islands to take more control of stocks around their shores.
The question that we do, the larger trawlers and that, I don't see how you could get more control would help us. The quotas will still be being issued the same way each year.
Farming is the backbone of the Orkney economy. It's worth over £30 million. Michael Cussiter runs a beef and sheep farm in the West Mainland.
As far as I'm concerned, all I'm actually seen to date is a few catfights in Holyrood. Going independent's a fairly radical business decision. The concern for me is, can Scotland survive on its own? And it's really a business at the end of the day. Do we even have taxpayers to create enough revenue to survive? Are we too reliant on North Sea oil?
But do the Northern Isles have much political leverage and bargaining power to negotiate a better constitutional deal?
In the 1970s and 1980s there was obviously a large pro-autonomy movement in Shetland and that has dissipated to a very marked extent. Even now, just over a year and a bit out from the referendum, there seems to be no sign of a growing political movement in Shetland that's towards some kind of autonomy or towards seeking some kind of special powers. And the political reality is that the Liberal Democrats only have the 5 MSPs. They're not in a particularly strong bargaining position vis-à-vis the SNP, which is the biggest and strongest party.
The Northern Isles adopted a different perspective in the 1970s from the rest of Scotland on the constitutional debate. It remains to be seen in 2014 what destination they decide on this constitutional journey.
Well, let's cross back to the conference and join the Shetland Islands MSP, Tavish Scott. Good afternoon, Mr Scott. Thanks very much for joining me. A very interesting report there from John Johnson. How Scottish do you feel?
I'm a Shetlander first, Andrew, and always will be. As I said in the debate we had today, I'm a Shetlander first, a Scot second and a Brit third. That's pretty well the way all of us Shetlanders think.
Now, we're looking in the report at the natural resources that the Northern Isles boast. When it comes to oil in particular, what kind of resources, oil resources, are we looking at to the west of Shetland?
Well, the enormous discoveries that have been made in recent years, and actually some time back, are now being exploited by a variety of companies, from Chevron to Total, the French company, and others, including some British companies. So there's an enormous potential there, and there's no doubt that oil is currently going through a very exciting period, and Shetland is actually as busy today as I remember it when I was going to school some years ago. So really important time for the islands, and we've been used to negotiating and used to dealing with the oil industry over 4 decades now. It holds no fears, I can assure you, for Shetlanders.
Of course, because you've set up your own oil fund, which is of course an aim of the SNP government in a post-independence Scotland. Realistically, if we do look at post-independence, if there is a yes vote in the referendum, do you think it is possible that Shetland could make a case for going it alone from the rest of Scotland?
Well, will you forgive me for not accepting that there's going to be a yes vote, Andrew? I don't think Scotland is going to vote for independence, and I certainly know Shetland is not going to vote for independence. But I think whatever happens, there is going to be change, as you have seen this weekend from the Liberal Democrats here in Dundee. And that kind of change does present an opportunity, not just for Shetland, but for Orkney and the Western Isles, indeed every rural area and island area of Scotland, who is sick to death of the centralisation under 5 years of nationalist government. That's what this is as much about as anything else, that we have just seen powers and responsibilities removed from us over a range of things that we used to do ourselves in the islands because Edinburgh thinks it knows best. Well, they don't know best, and police centralisation is just one of those where that's clearly the case. I think you'll find that in Kirkwall, in Lerwick, in Stornoway, and right around Scotland, there are many rural communities now saying devolution was meant to pass beyond Edinburgh. It hasn't. It's retrenched into Edinburgh, and that change has to happen.
Now, when Brian Taylor put the point to Danny Alexander about the fact that it's "we're oil," as I think you said in a Holyrood debate, he rather got a bit tangled up and wasn't really maybe going wholeheartedly with that devolved settlement that you're trying to put forward there.
Well, forgive me, I haven't seen Danny's. I hope you mean he didn't get. He wasn't worried by the accent and the translation of the accent, or more the political point. But the political point is about oil is very simple. If Alex Salmond thinks that it's all his oil, then he's got another thing coming. If that's the debate we want to have in Scotland, then I've got any number of learned lawyers as well, as Alex Salmond does on the EU, who will argue that there's something different could be considered from the Northern Isles perspective, and that's a debate we'll very happily have. But anyway, I think it's all a bit academic because Scotland isn't going to vote for independence. What we do and will have is a real debate about where powers should lie within Scotland, and that's a debate that Shetland's going to play a big part in.
But even still, and finally, realistically looking at this, it is hard to perhaps fight that tide of centralisation. I mean, the fact that they did it in the police force was to save money. It is hard to kind of fight against that, I suppose, from where you stand.
Well, you're right, it is hard to fight against it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have the fight. And I can tell you that the rewarding thing for me as a politician has been the number of people who've contacted me from around Scotland who are equally fed up with centralisation and the loss of powers to local government. Did we not just see the COSLA president last weekend or the weekend before saying this has got to come to an end? He basically said we've got to stop having a know-it-all government taking powers away from local councils. I think you'll find that the agenda that we have in the islands is actually a very much a shared one across the whole of Scottish local government, and about time too.
OK, Tavish Scott, thanks very much for joining us live from the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, how much oil revenue can an independent Scotland hope to reap has been hotly debated all week. Vince Cable, the business secretary, joined the row yesterday and warned delegates of the dangers of using windfalls to fund the economy.
When the Scottish Government says in 2017-18, there will be 57 billion of oil revenue, which of course will come to an independent Scottish government and provide you with a kind of Norwegian nirvana. They may be right. They may be right. It's possible. But equally, you have to look at other scenarios, including the Office of Budget Responsibility, which said on equally, and of course they're not political, they're completely independent, on another scenario said, well, actually, it may not be 57, it may only be 31. And that would be an unmitigated disaster for an independent Scottish government, because they would have to savage all public spending here or drastically raise taxation.
Vince Cable, the business secretary there. Well, I'm still joined by Professor John Curtis. He's with me in the studio. John, it was interesting to hear Davish Scott there, a very different dimension to the independence debate. And of course, Vince Cable was picking out the unionist case against what the Scottish Government had said this week on the oil boom, the look at oil revenues.
Well, what Davish Scott was doing was, in a sense, was articulating a very common Liberal Democratic theme, which is a belief in localism, and particularly a belief in promoting the interests and autonomies of the more rural parts of Scotland. Because at the end of the day, it is in rural Scotland that a lot of the Liberal Democrats' strength lies. And of course, it's in the Northern Isles. It was the only two places where the Liberal Democrats were actually able to win a constituency in the 2011 election. You heard in Willie Rennie's speech the criticism, which has been pervasive for the Liberal Democrats, about the centralisation into a single police force. Now, I mean, the truth has to be said that before the advent of devolution, one of the concerns that some people expressed about is that it would indeed result in the government in Edinburgh trying to suck things away from local government. And I suspect some of those critics may now feel to some degree vindicated. But, you know, this is a pretty common Liberal Democrat theme and something we can expect to go on. Vince Cable, meanwhile, of course, yes, going on about the price of oil. The price of oil is clearly crucial to this debate about the future of independence. I guess now, of course, the next interesting is I imagine we may well get new estimates from the Office of Budget Responsibility this week. One presumes, given the confidence with which Vince Cable was talking yesterday, that we're not going to get now a radical upward revision from OBR, because if there were, that would be yet another twist to this debate that's clearly going to go on for quite some time.
John, thank you very much. Now, at the conference, we have some members of the press standing by with Brian Taylor once again. Brian, it's over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. We're going to discuss the crucial issue in Dundee this weekend, the absolute nub, the big one. It's, of course, the derby at Townellice. No, actually, we're going to discuss the Liberal Democrat conference, certainly first, anyway, joined by two colleagues. David Clegg, first of all, that debate on the bedroom tax, I mean, they really gave it a kicking, didn't they?
They absolutely destroyed it. And I think what it showed very eloquently is the complete disconnection between what the Lib Dems are saying in government and what their members are saying on the ground. Then I also thought it was very, very interesting that no one spoke for what is being done under the Liberal Democrats' name. At some
point there was somebody, one of the speakers said, no MP is coming forward to defend this.
Yeah, I mean, I asked Nick Clegg about it yesterday when he was in Dundee for the conference, and he defended it, but I thought he felt uneasy about it. It's clearly very unpopular, not only with the public, but with a lot of Lib Dems as well.
Tom Gordon.
Well, exactly, it's very bad for Willie Rennie as well, because he has been one of the most steadfast defenders of the tax up here when very other people would defend it. I think on one level the Lib Dems here will feel good about the vote they've had, but on another level you could say, well, where have they been for the past few years? This has been coalition policy for a long time. There's just a fortnight to go, and all of a sudden they're finding their backbone. It's too little too late, I think.
We had Alistair Campbell, David, on the Alistair Campbell. We had Alistair Carmichael on the programme earlier, a flashback there to earlier times. Alistair Carmichael on the programme, defending the tax, defending the principle of the tax, defending the issue of under-occupancy, but Liam MacArthur also as well, saying perhaps there had to be more effort to mitigate the impact.
Yes, this is the thing that they're saying, that they want to mitigate it, but that seems a perverse logic, that they're voting in a law in one parliament and then saying elsewhere what we need to do is try and mitigate this. Why are you doing it if it needs to be mitigated? Nick Clegg, astonishingly to me yesterday, said that he was recommending that councils do look at how they designate bedrooms. You almost seem to be suggesting that they gerrymander what a bedroom is so that they can get out of the bedroom tax, and that's his own policy. They're tying themselves in knots.
Well, there are steps already there technically to mitigate this, the discretionary housing payments they call them, but they only cover about 10% of the cuts, so they've tried to cushion the blow. It's clearly not being enough, and it's still going to be a massive problem with them. You can't really tinker with this. It's such a sweeping, fundamental change. people losing perhaps a quarter of the housing benefit from the 1st of April. You can't mitigate this. You either scrap it or proceed with it.
Let's talk about Willie Rennie's speech first of all. David, the theme is one of the same theme as Nick Clegg. You know, you can't trust Labour to boost the economy. You can't trust the Tories on fairness. We're the ones to offer those two. But his close was even more evangelistic than Nick Clegg. He was saying, you know, stop apologising, get off your knees, get out there and fight, didn't he?
Well, he did say that, and it was a very much, I guess, trying to boost the morale of the troops. But I'm afraid you have to come back to the bedroom tax, which he didn't mention in his speech, despite it coming just after that motion. And I mean, I do think that they're citing by-election victories in council by-elections in Kirkintilloch, or not even victories, just successful votes.
Advance, yeah,
in Rutherglen and
yeah.
Kirkintilloch. And he's trying to suggest that a few hundred votes in a council by-election is a sign that they're on the up. Well, I think he's just grasping at straws.
Well, of course, they would use Eastleigh as well as an example, but that's not a direct Scottish example, but they would use Eastleigh
exactly.
too.
We had the winner of Eastleigh, Mike Thornton, introduce Willie Rennie here. You get the impression that if it wasn't for Eastleigh, they would be really down in the dumps. I mean, what else do they have to cheer themselves up about? If it wasn't for Eastleigh, they'd be absolutely in a slough of despond, you know. So that's why Willie Rennie had this repeated message: we're doing this for the greater good, you know. We're doing, unpalatable things in the short term, but the country will listen and see us for a greater good.
They need to see some upturn in the economy.
Yeah, but they've been selling themselves as like the government's conscience. Willie, Nick Clegg is some sort of Jiminy Cricket figure for like years, and it's not resonating with voters. They get blamed for all the bad stuff and don't get much credit for the few good things they are doing.
But on the economy, I mean, they need an upturn, don't they? They need some results.
Danny Alexander in his speech said that more cuts will be required in the next spending round. There's more pain coming, and there's no sign of a silver lining at the moment. If the economy continues to go down, they continue to pursue an austerity agenda that is deeply unpopular with the public now, I think they're going to have real problems.
I think we, David, Willie Rennie's points about the Constitution offering of further powers, but from the Liberal Democrats, and saying the other parties would perhaps coalesce post a referendum.
Yeah, I think he's on stronger ground when he talks about that, because at least it's a consistent position that he's had and that they have pursued for
riding ahead. Yeah.
So I mean, I think he does have an argument that he's kind of breaking the ground on that. This idea of a federal Scotland within the UK that they've put forward, and we've now seen the Conservatives begin to move towards that position, and Labour, I believe, are going to be unveiling their plans for increased devolution at their party conference later on.
I think Willie Rennie is jumping the gun massively. It was only last autumn that he announced this idea of cross-party talks, and now he says they've virtually come to a consensus. There's not a consensus, there's a cacophony. There's a huge range of different ideas. The Conservatives, you refer to Ruth Davidson's position there, the Conservatives haven't even begun to discuss inside their own party the sort of powers that
So you don't think it's feasible the three will come together with a to be fair to Willie Rennie, he's not offering that or proposing that or forecasting that.
I mean, Labour have got an interim report only due next month. The Conservatives haven't started.
They want to go their own way,
and you can be sure there'll be all different kinds of flavours and varieties come forward. There's no consensus.
In a word, David, can they come together? Will they come together?
No, I don't think they will. On devolution, you mean? And
yes, indeed.
I don't think they will have a specific set of policy that they'll all sign up to before the referendum. That seems too unlikely to me.
Thanks both. Thank you very much indeed. And with that, I'll hand from Dundee back to the studio.
Brian, thanks for all your contributions this afternoon. Thank you. Let's get some final thoughts now from John Curtis. John, this conference comes at a slightly awkward juncture for the Lib Dems, the Scottish Lib Dems, as they look ahead a very uncertain future.
Well, usually we would expect a conference for a party that's out of power in now a couple of years since election to be beginning to think about what its policy proposals are going to be for the next election. We've not seen very much of that, and I think in some sense one can understand, and in a sense perhaps we've been quite gloomy for Willie Rennie for the last couple of hours. Here's a little bit of brightness for him. The truth is, of course, is that Willie Rennie at the moment has very little idea of the circumstances in which he will be leading his party in the 2016 Holyrood election. Now, what he might hope for is, first of all, of course, that indeed that Scotland votes no in the referendum. That clearly is his first wish. And that perhaps, therefore, as a result, the SNP begin to squabble amongst themselves and not know the same threat in 2016. And that, secondly, perhaps by 2016, he isn't having to fight an election against the backdrop of his party still being in power with the Conservatives at Westminster. Now, that might result in a much more optimistic context for him to fight in 2016 than the one which he finds himself in now.
John Curtis, thank you very much for that and for your company here this afternoon. Thanks very much. And that's all we have time for this afternoon. I do hope you can join me for Sunday Politics Scotland tomorrow from 11:40 on BBC One. From the team in Dundee and the conference team here, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.